So good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is the first in this summer semester's lecture series. And I hope you must have seen it, and I hope you are excited as I am. Today's commencement, so to speak, of the series, we have David Viola tomorrow, Italian but London residing artist. We have Kai Miller and Shajay Bhushan. Shajay works at Saha Bids and is heading up some of their advanced processes in architectural design and also with respect to fabrication, I believe. Lauren Bassett from ICD, Achim Menges Institute in Stuttgart. And we have a virtual reality symposium on the 25th and 26th of May. And for that symposium we'll have Sanford Quinter coming back, Wolf Singer, who's a neurophysiologist living in Frankfurt, world-renowned neurophysiologist. I believe Daniel, Sanford and Wolf Singer will be kicking it off on Friday evening. On Saturday, the next day, there will be a series of presentations. Amongst them are also one by the artist Rachel Rossen. We proceed with Dagmar Reinhardt. This is a lecture that is hosted by the Stiftung Staedelschule für Baukunst that everyone should know. And they bring back every year an alumnus from the Staedelschule architecture class. And this time around it's Dagmar Reinhardt, who's a professor in Australia and who's specializing in using design with respect to robots. Kili Sotama, sometime a long time ago, a partner of mine in Ocean, and he will be coming here from Helsinki to present some of their work. Daniel Norell, that certainly everyone now in the second semester know. So he travels here from Sweden to speak, and then we rounded off with the Dean's Honorary Lecture and Wolf Matrix end of June. So I look forward to see you all return for these lectures and hope that you will enjoy them as much as certainly I will. And tonight's lecture is Minsuk Cho, residing in Seoul, with a practice there counting 20-25 people. You're doing a, so to speak, worldwide tour, jumping cities and continents. And we're lucky to be able to enjoy or find the time to come here. Minsuk studied architecture in Seoul at the Architectural Engineering Department of Yonsei University. And then he went on to Columbia University, where he graduated in the graduate school program in 1992. So he's someone who has experienced many of those names that we touch upon in terms of references in theory and history, including, for instance, Kenneth Frampton. He went on to work in New York for Coulatan MacDonald, and that would be before he then joined Polchek and Partners, also in New York. And then he moved to Europe and worked for OMA from 1996 to 1998.
Yes.
And formative as it must have been, Minsuk also pays respect to Rem Koolhaas as someone who continuously feeds the discipline with not only inspiring work, but also observations and theory, if you want, or concepts that are of enormous value. And obviously through these various experiences he gained that which is needed to set up his own practice. He did so with James Slade in New York in 1998, and then he returned to Seoul in 2003 to set up mass studies. Funnily enough, so doing research, which one must for preparing to say a few words as a way of introduction, Mass Studies has a completely outdated website, and you hardly will be able to see the latest work, and I think for good reasons. And yet, even though it then is not refreshed, the project list dating back these many years still is very, very impressive. And for their work, they Minsuk has won the first prize in the 1994 Shinken Shiku competition. With Slade, they won the Architectural League's Young Architect Award in 2000. Twice cited for the Progressive Architecture Award in 1999 and 2003. The Boutique Monaco project was a finalist for the International High-Res Award right here in the German Architectural Museum in 2008. And you were nominated again in 2010. And I suppose also part of the background at Columbia, and perhaps also at OMA and throughout, has led Minsuk to pursue basically a practice in terms of, we're speaking about built work, notwithstanding of course the fact that there will be numerous projects that go unrealized, and yet the realized list is very impressive. And basically through this, he engages with discourse on architecture through social, cultural, and urban research. Projects date back to 2003, obviously, for Mass Studies, with the Pixel House, much published. The Dalby Theme Park in 2004, with its careful play on the oblique. This is too long to go through all of them. Seoul Commune in 2026, that was not the year it was done, but Bundle Residential Tower, S-Trenu, initiated 2006, completed 2009. Ring Dome, which I believe was done for New York the first time, and then it traveled, appeared then eventually in Milan in 2008. The Sea Gallery, with its stunning interior, from 2007, and not the least, also keeping a practice by choice limited to 20 to 25 people also means that Minsuk engages with projects of a certain scale and for certain purposes that we would want to recognize as an experimental pursuit. As such, the World Expo building the Pavilion of Korea in 2010 was awarded a silver medal by the BIE in the category of architectural design for the World Expo, obviously, in 2010. And we also received a presidential citation for that. And the Daum Space is another project. It's for an IT firm in Korea, including a master plan and a large-scale building. In 2014, all of these efforts came to the point where PLATEAU, Samsung Museum of Art, presented an exhibition of your work. It was the title Before and After, Mass Studies does Architecture. And the list obviously includes, not the least, last but not the least, the fact that you appeared at the Biennale in Venezia, I believe both in 2004 and 2010. Before, in 2014, you were the commissioner and co-curated the Korean Pavilion at the moment when Koolhaas directed the entire show. And for that you received the Golden Lion Award for Best National Participation in the Biennale. And I believe the list ending with this is a proper testimony to the quality of your work, and we are delighted you are here to share some of that with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Johan, for extensive going through. And yes, it's really a pleasure to meet you here. And thanks for being here, despite of this fantastic weather. So I try to, I'll sit down and maybe I'll go through it. And usually I sprint through this because I have tons of things to show you, but I start out my first visit here, which was 1990. So it was, this is my second visit here, so I'm really excited to be here. 1990, that was when I first, I moved to New York, and I just finished my first year at Columbia Grad School, GSAT, and it was a summer, and yeah, my title is called Challenges, and you can hear me, right? Do I have to do that? Yeah, I'm talking, it's lowercase, small font challenges without sounding too heroic or pompous. But this was also another challenge that 28 years ago when I first here with a backpacking all by myself. That challenge was actually go around the world also. So that's kind of, because I'm doing this 10, 11 day go around the world, but that time mission was, challenge was how many Le Corbusier buildings I can go through. Okay, so I was just going around. I think I ended up counting about 26 anyway. And I happened to of course I knew this important place, so I just come in and I was peeking like a spy, these Peter Cook inspired drawings on the wall and all that. And then I was very hungry, so I went to a canteen. And when I first walked in, today I asked, first thing was I have canteen, and they pointed out this room next to it. I was like, oh, it's not this. So Johan kindly brought me upstairs. Yeah, this is it. And this was amazing because I don't know if you remember, but there were like a giant 4 tables. I think it was 4. And I was a complete stranger. And now I looked at you completely mixed up. It was mostly Europeans. They're all like super cool looking, artistic looking people. I was like this Asian with the backpack, and I was very hungry, and then I just somehow got myself sitting at this giant communal lunch, and it was actually really I don't know if you still have that, but like chef comes out and introduces the menu, and there are like young pubescent boys and girls who are serving, like almost like a family. It was very sweet, yet very cool environment. And these people sitting next to me they were also not very able to speak English very well. I think they're mostly Germans. And then my English was maybe 10% up now. So somehow we communicate that I want something very special. So what I got was this giant dish, like German portion of very white, creamy, what turned out to be a tripe, cow tripe, which is the delicacy, but I wasn't very sort of a cosmopolitan in that. So anyway, so it was actually a quite traumatic experience to eat this very large portion, only relying on salt and pepper, and of course I wanted to be very kind, and I mean they're very super kind people, and they try made me sort of challenge this kind of a new culinary, which I found also you guys very into. So that's how I remember this place as a very open and engaging, yet also give me a very special challenge for something very different and unusual at the time. So yeah, so today I'll go through many things here. But our math study has been 15 years, and Pixel House, and we've been quite fortunate to explore projects that are very different in terms of scale, from very small to large, and also speed, a very fast project, to very generous time span of projects. This is what now the model is here in Deutsche Architecture Museum. I'm showing all the projects that we completed as an intro to show, is this one, different context, what kind of, it means there are many Koreans here, but it's quite diverse. Although it's one of the most urbanized country now, more than 80% of population lives in the city. This is another one that engaged. We didn't make it to the final, but top 30 or something. Bunder Matrix. This was our also German collaboration with Realities United, based in Berlin, temporary thing. And you know, it was also, but it shows also conditions that are so defined and limited in terms of what we can do, but also this one is a different opposite case where you have to invent a completely new kind of tool to imagine some kind of a city or sorts from complete emptiness and so on. And I think this is Shanghai Expo. This is another one in Korea, the tip of Korean Peninsula. And it's more, I'll just kind of reach to, this is more recent one, probably the largest one that was we designed, completed last year. Often this bigger, faster, cheaper becomes the most sort of mode of operation for, let's say, 90% of construction. And we engage every source of variations of these three factors. This is another one that we recently completed. I'm going to get into them more extensively later, if the time allows. This one is right now, we're in the middle of also, we're doing something very new to us, that is the, it's very Le Corbusier building. It was built in 1961 by someone who worked under Le Corbusier. Actually, he was part of the Chandigarh team. This is a French embassy that is considered one of the sort of best modern architecture in Korea, and we're doing extension and also restoration of this modernist heritage. And we'll tell you something, I'll tell you about this also, a later part about this DMZ. Often we do almost every time we do something that is completely self-initiated project also. And I think this is Francis Ali's artist that I like. And he talks about this art market, and I think it's, especially our region, is very easy to grow big and very specialized one thing, and it becomes this soulless robotic operation. But we've been actually maybe very good at avoiding that. So now on this recent project we did, just almost completed this house. It's for a family. He's a professor. Very well-regarded young neuroscientist, study about the brain, and he has 3 daughters and a wife who's also a teacher in this what looks like maybe the closest to suburb of America, or maybe in European context, a Korean version of it. And one of the small challenge, yet not unimportant, in this case we had to kind of have this house for 5 people family, but also he has many books, 20,000 books. So it almost, we have to build a library and a house together, small scale library. So basically we did this almost 2 separate volumes. Also, by the way, this area is obligation of having a sloped roof, so we have to follow that. So the first volume is one with the living and dining, but double height, with the upper mezzanine floor being the library, and then 3 daughters sort of living part above. And the other volume is the ground level, is where the couple lives, and then above is another double height space for his study room, which also has a mezzanine that has books. So in a way, these books becomes like a passage and almost like a promenade within, which becomes later outdoor sort of a walk. See, it's almost complete. Actually, now it's complete. This was maybe 10 days ago picture. So this is the living room, and now they're just, actually, this is unusual because they have this, instead of people moving in first, the books are moving in, and he hired 3 students who specialize in become future librarians and organizing quite extensively. And this volume, as I mentioned, has a nice south-facing patio. And this will be his study. So this is from mezzanine of the 2nd floor, the third level. So his study, looking down at his study, and then another level down, the living room, the ground level. And this is we have almost identical, quite Spartan room for the three daughters. And then this slope roof obligation becomes a nice attic, and then that would extend to the best view, that is the roof. So it kind of becomes it completes the promenade vertical within this not so big. I mean, it's not small house, but like that. And then I'll show you also more recent project that we are working on. We just finished this building permit package, so we're in the process of it. And this allows me to talk about the Seoul a little bit, which is, this is a picture of Seoul, almost an anonymous part of Seoul that when I see this picture, I cannot recognize it, because it's just a generic towers and really dense sort of buildings. But then when you see the rest, the mountains, that allows us to sort of recognize, because I can name these mountains and kind of a trigonometry way, I can sort of guess where this area is. And some even argues that Seoul doesn't need a sort of landmark building because it's quite a unique city that has a very alpine condition, which started 625 years ago, quite clearly. And this project is actually complete flat area that used to be a farmland near a domestic airport, Gimpo Airport, and that recently become this R&D. A lot of these large corporations like LG is moving in, and it's a completely new city, become part of the city with new subway connections. And then this has this really large park next to the water, and then these kind of linear sort of park as a sort of a connective tissue of this area, which has this kind of really organized, everything is almost identical volume, 10 stories and so on, because of the airplane flying above and so on. So, and this is a nice engagement also where we're doing with the city, because it's a public park, but then there's a company that collaborate with the city that they donate this building. They built this small museum, and they use 30 years, and then they return to the city. And so it's kind of a partnership of private and public. So it's not a big museum, but we are asked to design also park together with it, and it was a competition. So what we did was very simple. It was almost 100 meter by 90 meter square park. And it was basically, we introduced all of almost like a landscape element that kind of first generated by this, what would happen naturally, these passages, creating this kind of a diagonal shortcuts within the park. And then it becomes create 4 mounds, and the 4th mound, the largest one, becomes a park in a way. And this will be a quite simple presence. These 3 other mound, actual landscape, will be a little gentle mound. So it kind of creates some kind of a containment in the midst of this very orthogonal city. That's the entry. And then also it happens, this arc element happens as a sort of a movement that you can climb up through the stair or ramp. And that will allow to also make this roof as a sort of public territory. And then the competition brief asks 3 spaces that are small to large, and also that has a different ceiling height. And instead we actually create a one sloping roof that kind of has this varying ceiling height, so that it could turn into one large space with skylight above, or it could be separated as needed. So it kind of ranges from 3.3 meter space at the beginning where the cafe begins to more than 9 meter tall space. And then the second level has some public portion also, the lecture room, and then that leads to roof. And the roof becomes sort of bleachers overlooking and facing the park. This company is also specialized, it's called Kolong, and it's a nylon company, and it makes tents and sportswears and so on. So we're going to develop some kind of a simple tent also for the summer. And then another project that we're currently working on is also deals with the river of Seoul. And Seoul has a large river that is 1 kilometer wide, and now about 27 bridges that is crossing. South part, which is about 50 years old, and the old part, as I mentioned, more than 600 years old. And when I was a little, only had 3 bridges, and I was able to swim. There was a beach there, but then, of course, it comes with also flood, and there was not so much of a water control. And this was when South Korea was poorer than North Korea. I'm talking about early 70s and so on. So they had to build this polder along the river and to control the water, and now become kind of vast amount of river area becomes this kind of it's not very romantic river, but now they're doing a series of urban attempts. But in order to create this polder, there's so many things happen. Namely, a lot of these small islands had to be sacrificed to create a rubble, to create this wall along the river. And what happened was that this small island, which was kind of a zomia, there were people like, it's not recognized as this kind of strange territory that has their own culture, and they make their living out of ship making through these old days also, had to be sacrificed and evacuated to create a rubble. But somehow magically this island grew back even bigger than how it was. So over the last 50 years, it was caused by this sedimentation process that it disappeared but kind of grew back. And it became quite wild nature. It's still growing. And also it became a quite popular place to visit by migrating birds. And Korea draws about 60–50% of migrating birds that sort of flies through it. So it became a very important site. It's called Ramses site for this ecology site. So we decide to city decided to keep this as unoccupied by humans for the last couple of decades or so. So the premise was to keep minimum 250-meter distance, not to scare away birds, but to create a sort of a space for along the river, across the river, to view birds. And it was also invited competition of local and international architects about a couple of years ago. And our idea was actually, I think city initially wanted to have like this iconic thing, but we thought this would be maybe for once we can think about the city not as city, we create a city in a very human-centric view, but this really sort of enlighten us in a way that there's a lot of other things going on, like for example, nature has their own process and so on. So our idea was actually this area that is site created for a power station, now becoming this cultural facility in a few years, like a Tate in London, let's say. And it was a reservoir for a cooling purpose, but we took down this passage that we use as a bicycle passage and create another alternative sort of a platform that also functions as a bicycle passage, and we take down and create this kind of a soft edge along the river, so sort of bringing back to old state almost, and create this little island that we call it satellite Bamsum Islands, so that also the water direction coming from this the bird site, the Bamsum Island, to this direction. So we work with this expert to kind of generate this maybe the island that grows over time at the same time, and then we do this very simple passage that could be used for bird watching platform. So this section is before. Basically this area has these 2 raised highway, and this was a reservoir, and then now we're creating this kind of a new mounds within the water. And this is a new bicycle passage section. And this is from that new passage looking at this kind of floating beam, we call it. And it's a pontoon structure because this river is flood control, so it fluctuates about 10 meters. And it's a simple precast concrete I-shaped that creates a roof. It's about 6 meters wide. There are 7 of them. We'll actually make that from the south, where ship making and other steel manufacturing region that will bring it as like a raft almost. So idea was actually bringing these birds to this sort of new environment that will change over time, and as we cannot go and go directly visit there, so that's the idea. We are also going through very extensive sort of approval and negotiation process now. And we often use this, you probably know there's lots of Asian here, but Go game, which is sort of, we kind of consider as a fascinating analogy in a way that, you know, our, you know, I show this very different project and these are kind of, we accumulate these as an sort of unique, very specific experiences, but I think we tend to hope that it also we develop through this experience, we kind of create this constellation of different ideas, you know, and this Go game, the beauty of it is that when you take away one stone, it has no value at all, but it kind of creates the constellation at different circumstances, kind of creates different sort of significance in a way. So we sort of see our project, let's say, in this as maybe a white stone, each stone as our individual project, and then the black stone is the context that surrounds us and that defines architecture in each moment, and it's kind of an evolutionary process. So this also, some of you know that this is what you see on the newspaper. Next day there's a big game happens, and it's kind of goes by the chronology. These numbers are the orders, how it's played, and this kind of explains the dramas and different stories that happen. And in a way, kind of Duchamp also, Marcel Duchamp had this kind of obsession later part of his life after he was saying, creating lots of these unnecessary objects and so on, and then he sort of got involved in completely the beauty of this process. In a way that are also constantly evolving and recursive and so on. And in a way it's also, it's not a, you know, the Go game is not a competition sports, although now it's presented as like a media arena, but it's much more like this contemplative, high sort of a intellectual engagement between these two. So we are, you know, kind of, it's not exactly that, but we're hoping what we're doing is sort of resemble some of that process. So when we had to do this, our first 12-year survey for this PLATEAU art gallery, it was titled, was Math Studies Does Architecture? Because Math Studies doesn't make it sound explicit, what we do. And also we kind of present what we do as a verb instead of noun. And then and then kind of we called out first 12 years, maybe interesting project, category by, serialized. I mean, we always had this serialized serial numbers. Basically, the number represents 14 here is a year of design or year of we started, and then I is the order of that year. So A will be the first project of that year. And then it has 2 rooms. Before is what we present all the materials just before we complete the building. So it's basically a tidier version of our office. And then the after is everything that was produced, media, photos, videos, but also various things, maybe YouTube clips of someone uses our building, or anything that came after that become also sort of a post-occupancy survey project of what we have done and how it has changed and so on. And I'm continuously interested in this kind of aspect of architecture as a sort of performance. And yeah, but I think it can take hours to go through it. So, and then it was an opportunity to actually call out these our preoccupations of these ideas that we developed. In this case, at this moment, there are 21 ideas sort of listed as the degree of frequency at the very beginning. And these are, I mean, sometimes about the very common ones are the courtyard. We didn't even realize that, but there are so many about the courtyard. I mean, not typical courtyard only, but also vertical courtyard or and so on. And then also time specific, that was also forced, very frequent things. I mean, I'll just, and then we organized each one, what are those projects that involve with these sort of a constellation of ideas. And the red were the dead project, basically. That's our number system. So I think this was like 7 frequent sort of ideas that we explore. We call it formal structure. Dome-ino is a simple flat slab, but then this kind of category has this kind of a structure that has a specific form, but maybe sometimes very systemic way, which is in this case. We create this campus, sort of master plan, and the first building for Daum, which is maybe like a Facebook or Google of Korea, but you know, it's not a big one. And it's part of a country that is remote, that decided to move from Seoul to this remote island. So it has this kind of a Silicon Valley inspired idealism. That we were given site was completely flat, I mean, man-made tabula rasa, because it was more kind of a landscape, sort of natural state. But then they create this IT, digital sort of a portion of this island. And so we kind of imagine maybe this can be a small city that can grow with maybe a certain grammar that has maybe 5 distinct structural sort of forms that could be combined into various configurations, spatial configurations and so on. And this given site was 800 meters long, so also we had to choose the first building that was commissioned where it's going to be built. So it became apparent that we have to build something in the center. So these are the plans. Initially, we also had a fantasy of literally we create these giant precast forms and then kind of put together. But then it was a lot more expensive to create this formwork that you can recycle and over, you know. But we had this fantasy of creating almost like a highway construction. But Korean skilled cheap labor for formwork made out of a cheap wood board was so much proven to be feasible. So, and by the way, this is a very mid-range budget project, so we had to work with these limitations. So this is how it's completed. So, but nevertheless, it has this kind of initial idea of this kind of various forms that are 6.5 meter square in plan, the module. And also this color of concrete responds to this kind of a particular ochre color of volcanic rocks that are common in this island. And then around the same time, a little later, we got involved in this other, in this case, it's a super expensive, probably the most expensive per square feet project we've done, high-end, let's say, resort. We built a clubhouse. And this has, unlike the other one, has this kind of idea about the growth. This one is kind of this complete, sort of completed form. And then this one is actually literally across the street from where we used to work until 3 years ago. And we actually call this a Dome-ino project. And it's a very simple office that has kind of generic quality. And we sort of set out the plan that is all the services, elevators and other toilets and so on are in the back. And then we create this columnless 16.5 meter lengths on both sides, a square in plan. And then we realized that span is quite long to become one span, so you might have to have the column in the middle. So what we did was we shifted this grid so that it becomes 12 meter span, which is quite feasible. And then we create this kind of upturned beam. And then what happened was we worked with the mechanical engineer that we run air hot and cold for heating and cooling as a sort of floor plenum, but then the air doesn't have to reach in the middle because the periphery is enough for this size footprint, so that we are able to kind of carve this very shallow dome. So it become quite almost nondescript from outside, with this sort of slightly mysterious column location. And then inside there's nice surprise, I guess. And the earlier I show you is probably in this category. So this kind of, I'm showing it as a sort of example for a constellation of this particular idea that we've been developing, which is this. And then, but this came later, probably 10 years ago, 2007 was this Daum project. And this was kind of out of frustration of doing this, this other category that is number 4 through our survey, was about Dome-ino variations, we call it. And we call it a matrix studies. That is that mostly we're dealing with this very high dense city that is Seoul. Very early on somehow, our company has kind of gone through a very strange trajectory that very second year project that we did was 2004, was this boutique Monaco missing matrix building that is still the second largest building, and this what made us grow very quickly from small 4 people office to actually 40 people at a certain point. And then I decided to keep much manageable size. And this shows, sort of explains how city of Seoul has grown last 100 years. Since the beginning of 20th century, it was about 200,000 people, and then toward the end of the 90s, reached about 11 million people. So it's more than 50 times growth, probably unprecedented, although now other Chinese cities following, maybe exceeding this speed of growth. But then at the moment, but also interesting to note that around the time when I start having a practice, engaging back to my own country, it kind of shrunk a bit. So now it's about 10 million people. So we're also going through another, and then also society is also changing. Like we're no longer this kind of fast-growing developing country, but also we have all the symptoms of European, even worse in terms of aging, also infertility, and so on, suicide rate, things like that. So all these social changes follow. So this was 100 years ago, Japanese colonization era. There's a headquarter building, very German-inspired, the Schinkeles building, which doesn't exist anymore because we took it down, which I think is silly, and this is now. And these are the, you know, the density and sociability, the aspect, the city, when it's horizontal, the scene changes. I'm gonna go through very quickly. It's the 70s. This was also German influence. Back then, this dictator, general, president, went to Germany and impressed by Autobahn. And it was very, still Seoul has this large, as wide as 16-lane roads cutting through it. Moscow has that. I think there's a few countries. Now we're doing this road diet, what we call, and make it more pedestrian friendly and so on. And then there was not really public space because this is 87, which is like a 68 of Europe, the West. I was a college student then. This was a very war-like situation all the time against this autocratic regime. And then there's small alleyways. Old fabrics still had this kind of very nice community at work. And I mean, I think what's nice about still, I mean, that has been kind of consistent, but it's really not dangerous. And I think there's a really nice sense of sort of togetherness still happening a little bit. And this was in 1999. I took this picture myself. I was doing this research with students there, and this was when we create this elevated ring road, and it almost become this endless Lina Bobardi-like covered open space that kind of drew this almost spontaneous, unplanned sort of occupation. But still, there's no public from the public sector because they were very afraid of when you create a square, something will happen, something against demonstrations and things like that. And then I think 2002, when we are hosting the World Cup with Japan, this become first realized this can be a very euphoric sort of a situation. As many as 7 million people at the semifinal that's when we beat by Germans, right? I mean, it was kind of unfair that we beat Spain and Italy and went all the way, I have to admit this was complete home ground benefit. But then they spawned also very interesting culture of sort of what we call politainment. Political demonstration also become a quite like family kind of activity almost. And you probably heard of also 2 years ago, there was this candlelight protest that continued about 14 weeks every Saturday, started 20,000 people to almost 2 million people. I was at the very beginning, first, second, and then kind of, it become this very like hardcore activist thing, and then later become almost like a Rio Samba carnival type of Korean version. So we do have this kind of very interesting, and then now it's politically also we change a super exciting moment now, as you probably heard of. But then it's a long intro for these matrix studies, but when you talk about the sociability vertically, this is problematic. So from the early on, for me, we weren't very interested in making tower that is very unique or special. I mean, in the West, I think it's very, maybe not so rare, but here we have 80-story apartment towers that are anonymous, and you build like almost cookie-cutter suburban houses, but much larger scale. And that is worse in Hong Kong, and this is now the tallest KPF design tower. Who cares? Sorry. And it's like that, And so this is social conditions are very problematic in this kind of what we call chicken house situation. So this is the high-rise building that is 2004 we started designing, and we kind of try to create a sort of vertical urban condition that kind of came with small pockets of this outdoor space, some interactions, and it could also hoping to generate something. A lot of these attempts, develop. I mean, because this is also kind of arena that we're trying to always do something that we have to fight for. We're not asked. It's something that we are not asked for, because developer, as you probably know, that architects are valued for their ability to maximize the sellable area, not the common space for interaction. So we come up with the various excuses and so on. But it's also, for us, it's become like a prototype study that this could be developed into, this was 2004, and then a year later, 2005. This is Bunder Matrix. Yeah, this is the one that didn't make it to final. Nevertheless, it was a part of the show at the Deutsche Architecture Museum. This one has this kind of a dual presence of very sort of narrow tower, slender tower, but then it has also different appearance. And it's a it's a structured concept, the core in the middle, but we kind of try to open up as much as possible, detach, that it creates sort of what we call a social bridge. So each floor almost has this kind of a small place that you go outside, and then also have this small place of interaction, let's say. And then this Bunder Matrix later, it's a post-recession after 2008, where developer cannot build these large buildings, but then they're kind of focusing on like tiny little units for young people, professionals. And then it become also a stocky bundle. It's the same idea, but applied in a different sort of scale. And in this case, also much more useful, because each apartment is a very small studio apartment, so smaller space you have, I think you would need a more generous common space. So it become a quite sort of a popular, almost like an urban professional dormitory-like situation. So I'm comparing this, the tall one that we did earlier, 36-story, and then this one is a 10-story building. The tall one has 113 units, is a lot larger. And then this one, although it's much smaller, but it has 99 units. So it's also the living situation is quite drastically also addressing different sort of a social, economic condition also. And this one is a dormitory that we are very excited to do, because unlike the other project that we work with developers, this university had this almost, it's not an old university, it's since the 70s, but developed this tradition of this really have this great hope for architecture and become inviting important architect of generation above me in Korea. And I teamed up with the architecture firm Seung-Yo-Sang's Iroje, which he become actually a state architect, quite respected figure. Both of us doing a 600 capacity of student dormitory together, and also we do separate facilities. We did canteen, and then he did other things that goes with this new 1,200 student facility. So this was a really opportunity to really generate some kind of architecture setting that could be an interesting process for a student that has obligatory sort of being a part of living a learning community. Now they have this 1 semester obligation of living there, first year student. And I mean, idea was sort of in setting having this super polarized condition of this private space of this 2-person, which is a typical, and then this kind of anonymity of this large community. We thought it would be important to have these various scales of place of gathering. So we developed really from the very beginning very small unit space, because that's the 80% of the floor area of this project was. So this was what they had before. Other dormitory they had 3 already built, 2-bedroom, typical, and then it ended up having this corridor situation that is just only for passage. And then we developed something like a sleeping zone, and the beds, the studying zone is separate, and you still get the same situation. And then we had this idea of using the bunker bed and make it more compressed, but then the size of the one bed able to come out to the corridor, that you get this sort of pockets of different appropriate place that you can change and occupy. And initially they were not so keen on it, because they try double bed. They didn't like it because the furnitures are kind of squeaks, and so we said, okay, then we make it much more generous ceiling height, and then also we create this kind of pitch as a mini loft-like situation, and each bed also have their own windows that they can operate for ventilations and also light control. And then also each room has a small room, but corner windows and L-shaped desk, so that 2 students don't have to face each other all the time. Then we developed this simple 5.4 meter square incline structure module that is very this is also very mid-range, lower end of the construction budget. So it was a very simple construction, like we built this apartment, high-rise apartment, the planar construction. And then another challenge was the site, because as I have described before, Korea has about 70% mountains. So this campus was not an exception, because campus was at the mid-level of the campus, and the site is about 26-meter drop from the campus level to the edge of the site that is defined by the main road. And then, so we try to kind of make this within our site boundary, kind of courtyard type of thing, and it didn't quite fit. And then also we have to save these existing trees that are cherry blossom, so that we have to make this sort of a parallelogram configuration, and then we apply this square module, so it become like a pixelated module of parallelogram shape. So it's a simple diagram, it's like that. So, and then we first, these are the capacity of rooms, and then we create corridor and pockets, and it becomes a parallelogram, and then it kind of adjusts to this 26, 27 meter drop. What is this one? Cancel? This is actually animation, but I don't know whether it does strange thing. Maybe we can skip it. This shows the whole process of, sorry about that. No, I show it as a very simple diagram, but it's actually, we went through so many different changes, and this animation is made out of 2,000 sketches almost that become like an animation. So this is a recent picture after they move in. It's been a couple months already. And what's also exciting, I mean, unusual about this building is that it's a 10-story building, and they have a boys' dormitories, living area, first 4 stories, and the girls are top 4 stories, and the middle level, 5th and 6th level are the common area. So it's typically when you build a 10-story dormitory, the lower level, 1st and 2 stories are the common space, and then you take the elevator. But actually, this is like almost like a bridge, but vertically accessible from below and above. These are the sections. So I think I'm running a bit of out of time, but and so one thing also we did it very unusual but very typically Korean in my opinion is that we make this as soon as they get out of the elevator they take the shoes off and they take the slipper, so there's a locker, so it almost feels like it's not a corridor, but Koreans all do that. As soon as they take off their shoes, wherever, it becomes their living room. I showed you some pictures before. And then there are 2 types of corridors that are created by this parallelogram. So basically there's a straight corridor with pockets, and then there's this zigzagging corridors. So the 2 conditions. So with a limited budget, we're kind of, and then we managed to also increase some furnitures and so on. And these are the unexpected things that we went back, and a couple of weeks ago it was just rained. And it has a sort of a variety of single height and double height and so on. So, I mean, we're really hoping that how they can kind of evolve, because it has many opportunities to use, and I think, you know, the whole purpose of this was, you know, being part of this, not only learning, absorbing knowledge, but being part of the kind of a community. You know, you just, you know, trained to sort of be a adult member of civil society, and I think these kind of things with creating sort of some sort of a learning social practice, what to do with these kind of a semi-private, semi-public spaces. So that's challenge about this project is also we had this lower level and upper level are the kind of almost archaic quality, because it's kind of a quite deep openings, and light comes in a very kind of it's almost like a old building, like a medieval quality to it. But then middle level, where the common area, we wanted to create a really large sort of openness. So then we had to have this kind of road that is existing. So we had to use this. I'm sorry. What did I do? Is it coming? Long truss that is suspending the 5th floor, which is what we call student hub. So that has this quite tiny 20 centimeter diameter column, suspension column. And then also upper level, which is the largest common space that hosts 350 students dining seats. That we also brought about almost 30-meter long 3 trusses, so that it becomes very generous columnless space that supports another medieval condition above for the female dormitories. So that was when it was empty, and this is when they just moved in. So, and it's also, I mean, this building has a very interesting urban qualities, and this is a campus level that this 10-story building appears as a 4-story building. And I like this view because it kind of shows our stepping sort of in plan and in section, and also stepping in plan. And then the opposite side, lower level, also kind of appears as a 4- or 5-story building that is there we have to pull out like a drawer to create also balconies for boys sector, because the female automatically the stopping creates that, so it has a different characters. I mean, so much about this volume was optimizing the site condition and Also creating also not, I mean, we want to have also building blend in certain way, or yet creating, I mean, having its own character. So the idea, I mean, at the end, probably, what am I doing? So have this full spectrum, I think they have that, and I think it's something that we're keen on watching for a long time, how it's gonna be used and evolve. And I think I have it's kind of already quite late, right? I think I'll just show you something that we have done recently. This is a competition that we recently won. It's another invited competition. Okay. Is it? Can you help me? Tell me what's happening? Open? Okay, now it's working. Don't check? Okay, thank you. This was, it's for a Cinematheque in Seoul. And I don't think I need to really explain it because it has a subtitle. I actually used this video as our 15-minute presentation. It was the first time we made a little film because I thought this was for the movie people, and some of the juries were movie critics and so on. And we had fun with it. And the idea was also quite noble from the very noble intention from the public sector. I don't know if you heard of Korean cinema much, but Korean cinema kind of exploded in the late 90s, but now it's actually quite popular. Also K-pop, K-drama, and there's a lot of serious auteurs like Park Chan-wook, who has been an advocate. You probably heard of Old Boy, or a couple of years ago there's a Handmaiden. Yeah, and then also Bong Joon-ho, who made Okja, Netflix sort of release, but also was a Khan. Anyway, but then this when it become a larger industry, it kind of also kill a lot of the small voices. I think that happens in architecture too. So Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho, these directors, started kind of advocating from maybe already 10 years ago. And Seoul City Mayor, who was very sympathetic, actually chose a site that is almost like a birthplace of Korean Hollywood, let's say, Chungro. And it became a quite expensive site, but it's a small site. But the premise is to create this 3 cinema complex that with libraries and other things and so on. So we basically, I'm talking about my early days in New York, Anthology Film Archive experience and so on. This is what was in the 50s in this Chungmuro area. This is a site. And the unique thing about it is that, let me see. I mean, it's already explaining, but I mean, maybe we're not going to go through the whole thing because it's too long of an intro. Okay. Is it working? Yeah. Yeah, so this also has this typical Seoul situation that is very tall and small coexist. It's not very uniform condition. Although at certain good time, the economic time, they want to wipe it all down, and then they create this almost Singaporean, that was for a while this idealized thing, but I think we accept now, and it actually makes it much more interesting, this kind of almost montage, collage-like quality of city, and which is also much more realistic. And this back alleyway become also much more appealing place for us, because it used to be we're kind of heading toward this kind of sterile, high-rise sort of cities. This is a moment we actually, there's a 2-person rotates this model that is on this pedestal that it's like a lazy Susan. Anyway. So idea was they basically have 5 spaces that are very specific and mostly has this enclosure from outside, which is namely 3 cinemas from the basement and first 2, and then the studio, and then the top one is a bonus that we kind of suggest as a open air theater. And I mean, for us, it was also interesting to, and then that creates automatically this 4 voice that is very exposed to outside. And I think it's interesting to think about cinema in this time of age that where everybody watches, downloads, and carries around their own screens, and what's, you know, how can we sort of accommodate in a different way. I think it's mostly, I think now people go to these places also for different social purposes. So it's almost like a stacked up marquees, you know, of these old theaters which is the most social component. So it could be a sort of a multiplied vertically. Yeah, so this was like a surprise moment where it splits and then. No, but also, of course, you probably know the Eisenstein, the earlier Soviet filmmaker who coined this montage as a very important film technique. And that is about this, what you say, collision of independent shots, not sequential, but it's literally stacked on top of each other. So we create these kind of different sceneries, and again, this, you know, I think it says it there. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, this is we just got it. We're just about to sign the contract, and this will be we'll be working on this, and we're very excited to engage this creative field that I've been also very passionate about, and hopefully we'll complete it 3 years from now. So I think, I mean, I have the whole other thing, a political challenge part, but I think this will be also a good way to sort of end my talk and engage with you in a more, as a dialogue. So thank you very much. Yeah. I can just show you like this, right? Just, you guys good at multitasking, so you can be distracted or ask me questions, comments?
Actually, I had a question about, so the idea that you were, so actually there are 2 questions. One,
yes.
What were your, how did working at Rem Koolhaas's office influence you? And how did working at Rem Koolhaas's office influence you in any specific way that you would like to point out? I mean, how it influenced the way you work? And the second one is pertaining to design processes. Do you look at, I mean, how do you go about starting to work on a particular design? Is it based on the site conditions that are present over there, or is there some other thought that is going behind? Because I see a lot of the sections actually providing some mass and void relationships, but I'm just trying to understand how, in what depth does that go? Okay,
2 questions. Thank you very much. I mean, Rem Koolhaas, of course, has been very influential figure for many of us, I think, and I happen to have maybe extensively for those almost 3 years of time. So, but I've been in my field for almost 30 years now, I think, from counting my student days, so that's a 1/10 of time. But I mean, of course, he's been, from before I knew him as a person, very important. But I think he gave me a very good insight about how to deal with this city, urban condition that I'm from. Because I think that he was, I mean, of course, there's so many things he should be credited, but he was a very early sort of observer of this, what was happening in Asia. And Colombia was actually, they were quite ignorant about this, what was happening the other side of the world. So, and also I had this luck of engaging a couple of projects while I was working with him in Korea. So it was actually gave me a very good opportunity to sort of how I would position myself there, and yeah, because it was always a sort of a very opposite condition that I remember once when I was a student in Korea, architecture student. It was Olympic time, 1988, and they brought this, I think European, few German urbanists came to Seoul to how to make our city appealing, and they kind of gave us a death sentence. It's like they spent a month, and it's like we cannot. I mean, of course, when you look at Berlin, and you can never be like that, you know, or Singapore, although we are trying hard to become that. But I think it's I guess it's acceptance, and still with a some sort of critical attitude up to create not the further redundancy and something that kind of what was missing or highlighting what is latent there. I think those are the attitude that I learned from him. So, and then about you were asking about how to create a form method. I seriously, I don't know why to stop, but I seriously don't start with the particular things. And I think you kind of your question somehow made me we're doing sometimes completely have so much freedom, like this red concrete building, for example. That there's a natural beautiful surroundings, but we are given this vast sort of emptiness, and then I usually that's also very challenging, and then we have to set out some kind of limitations for ourselves and some kind of we call it last piece of puzzle project versus you have to come up with the entire set of Lego or something that some sort of a logic that you can kind of imagine something there. I think we've been quite also lucky that we've been kind of exploring this kind of two extreme ends and this whole spectrum in between. So this project was so much about this also limitation. For some reason this stopped and doesn't continue, so I'm sort of, maybe it's not that important. I mean it kind of ends sort of like going back to the beginning, but anyway. I can explain like that. I mean, the dormitory project that I showed you was also very much like what I said. At the beginning, we had this given very hilly side, which was very scary to deal with, and also we had other architects that I respect next to us who has a very different, almost opposite attitude, but we kind of consider it as almost like a complementary relationship, but then we have to abide certain although it's vague, but there's a master plan involved. And then we had this kind of a small unit idea of the structural modules, and then somehow that kind of built and went through so many sort of phases of design. So, things like that. It's all very different in a way. And I like it that way. There are certain architects who has very specific methodologies, and everywhere they go, they're expected to perform that. I think that's how you become brand. I talked about this Francis Alice sort of case, but for me, I like to explore completely different sort of facets of architecture. And I think the Korea has been a very interesting place for me because also, architecture is relatively new as a part of culture. It still belongs to construction industry, or still this robustness is still remaining. And so I've been kind of happy to be exploring. Also we had this kind of super precious, almost too much position. Certain clients respect us as something like, in the West, let's say. But a lot of this public project we're doing is also, we have to deal with a lot of these bureaucracies, and it's not an easy job. But I think it keeps us very grounded, and so that's how. I'm happy to, and one of the, I think, is a nice thing actually, to be like that there. Yeah.
Explain the architecture in a very pragmatic manner.
Yeah.
You explained your architecture right now in a very pragmatic manner.
Yes.
Restrictions.
Yes. Any other comments? Yes, please.
You talked about the categories that you categorize your
Yes.
little icons, and you just now talked about the facets and how you like to work in different fields of architecture. And
Yes.
which one would be your favorite category of the 20?
Wow. Let me try to go back to that. No, that's an interesting one. As I mentioned, it was actually very revealing. We didn't know, but we thought Matrix was at the very beginning. This was when, before this 2008 bubble burst situation, the global, that we went through it quite severely, and it's sort of the stagnation now. Kind of long depression almost, but just before that Matrix happened, and this was also politically very liberal time. I mentioned it to you before we came here. That's when architects didn't feel really, I think I was fully engaging in this market situation and so on, because politically I think it was very much more desirable situation. And then we shifted later. I don't know what's interesting. There was a last category had this skull mark. We call it a jackass project, which means like this. It's that movie, right? But we had taken the role of very dubious or problematic condition, but we kind of engage in a critical way. So, like for example, Shanghai Expo Korean Pavilion was something that I actually didn't show you because too long. But this was when these three bad things coincide, kind of typical, but the fastest and biggest and cheapest sort of situation coincide, and somehow we try to distill that into a Koreanness. I mean, we didn't pitch it like that. But this was a really hard process. But there is a process. You mentioned about the Zai Gallery with this thing. This was also insane process that construction took. It was a 10,000 square meter building, 30 meter high, very large volume space. But everything happened in 4 months. So we typically see this faster, bigger, cheaper condition just streamlines everything, and every complexity disappears, and that's how you kind of generate this homogeneous condition. But we knew that this would be a kind of extravagant project with the budget, so I said, okay, let's do this complex as possible and fight with the time. And I mean, each time it's like a car crash, and we really get exhausted at the end of it. But then. And we will never repeat again. But I think these are the one sort of exercise that we kind of get very excited. And then there's a Jindogu project. There's a category of this star. We somehow made that. That is like Seoul commune and things like that. You know, the word Jindogu is a Japanese term for useless inventions. That type of thing that there's a kind of you can Google it. There's a lot of funny things, but. The important thing is not being funny, actually. They are super serious, and somehow they have to come up with this premise that develop into some idea that end up become completely funny, like Seoul Commune is one of them, actually. This was also a critical way to approach like sci-fi with this given premise was this Vitra show. 20 years later, how are we gonna live? All this sustain, and this was half ironic. I think the Guggenheim project is Art Trap, definitely is a Jindogu project, but we just kind of throw away our moral obligation and seriousness, and then we're really focusing on one thing, and we just go weird tangent. And that has been like a B-side of our project, but that's also fun because actually it was also interesting because Seoul Commune was same time with the Buting Monaco project, that missing matrix tower, and it was when we really dealing with this like practicality and bureaucracy and everything, all this also thrown away, rejected ideas from whatever process, mainly from the client, somehow become a depository of this, like an evil twin project almost. So, we just have very kind of a loose, vigorously, maybe not rigorously, sort of a process of this kind of exploring different things. Yeah. So, long answer for your short, nice questions. Thank you. Please. Yes, please.
I have two questions. The
Please.
first one is, how much would you say of your work that lies inside of the autonomous realm of its disciplinary status?
So I didn't understand. Yeah.
How much of your work would you say that lies inside of the autonomous realm of its disciplinary status?
Okay.
And how much will you say that it responds to pressure, political pressures of urbanization or corporate economical performances? And yeah, that's one. And the second one is why does your website is still in Adobe Flash?
This is the thing. We talked about it. Okay, that's an easy question. Adobe.
I do not see the projects or anything.
Yeah. No. This was we sort of left it unupdated since the iPhone came out and everybody had to switch to new one, and I got very annoyed by it. I mean, but why? That's why I'm here. I would rather like to contact directly this interaction. I think this spreading thin knowledge, I think that was a very actually, that explains the cover, the before after. I mean, my involvement of architecture in my field somehow, especially in Korea, the construction really amount went down, so less and less opportunities. But then the shared knowledge of this internet business just went up from nothing to where it is now. And I think these two crossing was an interesting moment for me. So that was actually become our kind of a title page of our show. But anyway, yeah. So internet, is it important? I mean, actually, we talked about it with other friends. Actually, it's really not a strong statement, right? I should really make it like disappear or no. But I think no. And then the autonomy part, we're I guess I kind of explained it to you. This Jindogu could be a complete one form of autonomy. But I was when I went back to Korea, I was very much interested in develop some idea what I kind of maybe not so well sort of what do you call it, constructed with this co-analogy, but I like to build up some kind of the ideas and knowledge through very specific experiences, and each project, I mean, we're never autonomous. I mean, the actual what we do. I think there was a famous quote I use often with St. Jacobs from London. St. Jacob, 1% inspiration, 99% compromise. But your 1% has to be a damn good thing to went through all that. Yeah, I don't think it's a really pure area, but I think as an overall, maybe when you look back many years of this, there's some projects are completely failed. I mean, I'm very aware of that, and there are certain things that kind of has a level of clarity and sort of distillness. So I don't know if I answered it, but.
I mean, I was just interested because you say you had a project there, the one that was in an island in the south of Korea.
Yes.
And at what point you said that you had in mind to create these pieces where there is a sense, and then for some economic reason this couldn't happen. So my curiosity was how do you deal with that? How do you work through that?
Are you talking about this clubhouse that we did? I just briefly passed through it, right? Is that you mentioned about this island? The clubhouse you're talking about?
No. There was
the red concrete one.
There was a whole complex. Was like pieces.
Yeah. Okay. So you said at some point that you were thinking of developing the pieces, but yes.
It didn't happen for such and such.
Yes. About the formwork.
Exactly.
Concrete formwork. Yes.
So my question was about how the project of the architect deals. How would you say that your work as an architect, as dealing with the condition of architecture in itself, lies in light of those instances, of those pressures?
No, I mean this I think still it has this spatial quality when I speak for that specific project. It was kind of and also everything everything that we projected at the very beginning is just really the almost delusional level. We always start out that way almost, right? Because this company itself, initially we were even asked to design a master plan like that. It was just one building, but it was just a huge site. So then we had to do this free service of doing the master plan, the linear development as an excuse, but also we are hoping they will eventually grow larger. But the reality was 10 years ago they moved in, 2010, and this company is bought by some other company now. And it completely, they're still using it, they like the building, I heard, but it's also economically, socially a very different situation. And this, when you mentioned about this particular, we create this kind of 5 elements that kind of combine. This was one way of also, I could easily pitch as honestly, when I look back, we were thinking, that would be a really amazing thing, really build it like the infrastructure, but we also knew that there would be no hope just to have that not so big building to create that money. But it was always, persuasion and then rejection, and it's a negotiation at the moment. But I think nevertheless, I think the spatial qualities are similar, and it was also very challenging low budget project. So anyway, please.
There was a narrative in the video of the last project.
Yes.
And the project was also about Soviet montage.
Yeah.
Which is also about creating a narrative through maybe without anyone saying anything, and just by putting moments next to each other. And I've actually been to one of your viewings, the Songwon Art Center.
Songwon Art Center, yeah.
And it's a project that talks about binary positions.
Huh?
Binary positions.
Moderate position?
Binary oppositions. Binary oppositions.
Binary oppositions? Yes.
But it's quite interesting that today, when you narrate through the lecture, the topics are more pragmatic in some ways. So do you have a perspective on institutional narrative from an architect, or you're against this idea? And actually I have a second question because of something that you asked. A lot of your studies are based on population mass studies. Can I say that? Yeah.
Partly, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was just curious, why would you think data be important? Data be important as part of the mass studies?
No, yeah, okay, that's okay, I'll go from the back. Mass studies, I had this vague idea of, definitely I think when I come back out of OMA and this super Dutch height of that moment, this data thing, of course, there was one very clear way of doing it, but then the method is the choice of the word was something intersection of scientific and social. Maybe that's, because the word math is often used in both categories, and I think it's social science. That's something that I could feel quite comfortable. On top of many other disciplines that sort of intersects in what we do. So that's the one answer. And then, your question about pragmatism versus the Songwon Art Center.
No, I just find the narrative very interesting in both, because you have a beautiful section that really express montage. But during the lecture, you didn't really give a perspective on a narrative as an architect.
Yes.
Like institutional wise.
I don't know what do you mean by institutional narrative too?
For example, in the Songwon Art Center, it was a perfect illustration of binary oppositions.
Okay. The basement versus the
ultimate view.
Yeah. Yes.
But during the presentations of these beautiful projects, this idea wasn't. So I was curious if you have a perspective on narratives. Or you're against operative architecture?
No, I think that you're beautifully saying, but I'm not honestly fully understand what exactly. But somewhat, yeah. I mean, I guess I speak in a plain word. I could go on also maybe more conceptual manner, but I think it should be able to sort of. I should be able to communicate with a sort of broader range of people. So, and I'm mainly practitioner, so I don't know. It's
which is completely, the works are beautiful. It's not, I was just curious.
I think the questions are great. I think the questions are great, and I also think the work is beautiful. I actually thought,
please.
Also funny that you also bring up, speak about pragmatics.
Yes.
And
Probably that's too strong a word. I don't.
No, I don't think so. In fact, but I was also hoping to provoke you a little bit, and I said you explain your work in a very pragmatic manner.
Yes.
Just a very short comment. I think they say, and then that leads on to Ivan asking about, the relationship to the discipline versus pragmatical considerations, basically. And I think that, I think the work is stunning, and I think it really speaks also for itself. And I would take the opportunity, that might be a coincidence, or maybe not, that the name of your studio basically reflects one quality that just about in every project stands out as a very, very subtle, very beautiful feature. That's utterly playful treatment of mass. So whether that is the private house for the professor to begin with, there's a museum gallery in the park, right? Later on.
Something that we're working on right now.
Yeah, precisely. To the last project you also showed, but also the dormitory, in fact. The dormitory is, I think, particularly impressive because, I mean, it's so easy to imagine that as a completely dead building. And through this sort of playful treatment of mass, through various, and based also in part on reasons for pragmatic considerations, such as light, you actually end up loosening it up and end up making it appear, it seems to me, very light, or at least light in a playful manner with respect to that other thing that it is. It made a big, fairly heavy building.
Sure.
And then there are also two other qualities that strike me. Then there's a very, very subtle, it seems to me, very subtle engagement with the oblique, not in every project, with the oblique.
Oh, you said oblique?
Oblique,
okay.
Yes. The oblique and the curvature. Curvature.
A curvature, okay.
Yeah. So for instance, with the very easily recall with the last project, because it's so fresh in mind, obviously. So when we do the facade, and you basically clad the auditorium, you basically introduce a very, very slight curvature. The same curvature that you play with in the gallery in the park, on the side, which also serves oblique and then also engages with circulation. And I just find that very impressive. And I think, I don't know what you think, Ivan, but I think that is something that sort of pulls the work back into something that I begin to identify, not as a style, not as a personal, don't misunderstand me, not as a style, but as a recurrent feature, and something that then lands the work consistently with respect to certain disciplinary issues.
Yeah, I know. I also mentioned about the website because, well, at some point I thought it was like that. It was supposed to be one smaller joke.
Which one?
The website.
Oh, I see.
No, but
I don't think it's strong. It's a joke. It's just lazy.
The reason why also why is because I was reading also. Do you have text in your thing? So and I was reading some of that, and I was and also you at some point. Oh, sorry, I'm not mentioning.
Tell me.
I was reading some story that in the first months of the book you have a story of maybe it was one of the projects that you showed, where you went. You said that you went compulsively every day to the site, as it was this building was being constructed, right?
That text is there.
Yeah. So and then you talk about how architects now are forced to operate in this massive totalitarian scale, and how this is a really rare thing when you can be a more local thing. So my question was also like in this side.
I guess that's the last thing that I posted there.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I think, and then my site stopped, right? Because I had a very interesting trajectory because I kind of small country and then went very global, get influence, and then somehow discover a joy of being a local architect for that particular moment, actually. Because that was one. We did 2 projects literally across the street. There are 2 projects, and one of them was that project that I didn't show actually. But I don't think that project is not even on the website.
Oh.
Yeah. That's a nice ending to it, but. Yes, and I think for me, I realized because my attitude, definitely our attitude completely changed also. Maybe not that I'm saying become this reactionary local architect for sure, because I travel as much as I did more or less, and still also, but also I don't have to travel more in a way that because so many people comes to Korea. And also, last few years especially become such a discourse, become this new thing. Architecture exhibitions, the critics groups. Also, we have this, I don't know if you heard, but this Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism just inaugurated last year, and which I'm sort of involved in it. So I think these are all very new in this part of changing context that I guess I'm in explicitly responding to also, but
Let that be the closing words. Thank
yes.
you so much.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for.